reason that I'm here is because the club is seeking change.
He said, well, whether you come or not, you're going to see a completely different Spurs team under me.
My hope and my desire and what I'm going to try and do is give our supporters hope and belief that we're going to embark on something special.
Welcome into the Tottenham Depot. I am your host, Andrew. You can follow us at Tottenham Depot. You can follow me at Astetka. This is episode 194, a disappointing one to discuss today as Spurs go up to St. James Park. And, well, it was better than the last two outings there, but it still does not result in 3 points or even 1 point for that matter. Got Scott alongside. He is at Scott G. Bird. He's going to try and talk us through this one. Scott, what's going on, my friend?
Not much. Can't stand Spurs as we all talked about offline, but I'm just here so I don't get fined.
Yeah, that's pretty much the attitude that you're bringing to this one. Caroline is also with us. She is at CG Stefko. Caroline, how are you on this fine Sunday?
I'm a lot better than I was when I first woke up this morning and was just assaulted with terrible news from Spurs. I feel like our overseas listeners may not understand that unique experience that American Spurs fans have of sometimes you wake up and it's just like the sky is falling and everything happened while you were asleep. So that was very disorienting.
Yeah, there was a lot going on this morning. I was filling up the group chat. I was up very early, catching a flight back home. I did a little traveling this weekend, but it was seeing all of the information, which we will come on to, especially regarding Spurs women's team. And we've been complaining for a while that the transfer news was not coming for Spurs women, and all of a sudden it just came in.
Oh, it came.
It came in waves over the last handful of days, and we will certainly come on to that. Before we do, big announcement here on the pod. We are happy to announce a new partnership with Digital Spurs. Digital Spurs is artwork put to your favorite apparel: t-shirts, hoodies, sweatshirts, hats, so much more. Danny Garrison is the guy behind this. He creates these pieces, which we love so much, which includes the hat that I'm wearing right now. If you're watching on our YouTube page, youtube.com/Tottenham Depot. This is a Tottenham golf hat, which I love, and I've been wearing out on the course recently. So you can check out what's going on over at digitalspurs.com. Find your new favorite merch. Let them know that we here at the Tottenham Depot sent you there. And keep an eye out later this year for a special promotion that we're going to be doing with Digital Spurs as well. Go give Danny a follow at Digital Spurs on social media as well.
Yeah, Andrew, this T-shirt here is...
Oh, yeah, you got the Richarlison...
Richarlison pigeon dance on the soccer ball. Could he use Richarlison today, which we'll get into, but
we sure will.
Yeah, we love Digital Spurs and Danny here at Tottenham Depot. You can peruse Danny's site for a long time and not stop seeing really cool items, and even got one of my casual Spurs buddies who's a big golfer to pick up the same hat, or at least think about picking up the same hat you're wearing, and I may or may not have that en route to me as we speak. So just amazing work over there at Digital Spurs. Check it out.
Todd's been rocking the same hat on the pod the last few weeks. If you've been watching the YouTube videos, you've probably seen him wearing it. And also non-Tottenham stuff on there too. There's plenty of apparel, so go check it out. digitalspurs.com. Guys, let's dig into this one. There's no real easy way to get into talking about this match other than to say it kind of sucked, despite it being a really fun watch. Like, as a neutral, this would have been a really entertaining and fun watch, I feel like. But Spurs do go up to St. James Park, lose 2-1 today, their first defeat of the 2024-2025 season. The lineup news, I guess, is where we should start, because it was disappointing to kind of, Caroline, you alluded to it, like wake up and just find out, oh, Mickey Van de Ven did not make the trip up to the Northeast. And all of a sudden we're playing Radu Dragusin in the back line, which I don't think went poorly, to be perfectly honest. I think we could nitpick, but overall that was like the big change. One other change from the Everton match was Patma Tassar coming back in for Brennan Johnson. But Scott, anything in the lineup stand out to you other than the obvious, with Van de Ven kind of being the surprise miss from this match? Obviously there was no Solanke, no Richarlison, as you alluded to. So Son was kind of deputizing in the middle, although Kulusevski played a lot there in the early going before the halftime sub. But what did you make of this starting 11 and kind of how it played out?
Yeah, I thought the midfield was correct if we want to talk about Sarr, and I talked about it at midweek with Dakota, but I think Sarr is tailor-made for this game today, and I think the midfield proved to be correct with the amount of possession and control of the match that we had. It all happened in the midfield, as it tends to do, right? But up front is where we got it wrong. Kulusevski in the middle, I thought, was a really poor decision from Postecoglou, and the reason I say that is, against this Newcastle team, especially their center backs, you're going to have somebody that can get their head on the ball and attack the ball in the air. And when you're going to have so much of the ball against a team that's going to be super astute defensively, well drilled, they're going to be organized. And Kulusevski doesn't necessarily attack the ball well in the air, in my opinion. I thought Kulusevski's skill set would have been much better suited out wide to break up their counter in a lot of ways. He's kind of slow on the ball, but I think against Newcastle, that's okay. And I wouldn't say that at the expense of Odegaard. I don't mean to like dilute it with that too, but I'm just saying I think if you're going to play Kulusevski today, it's out wide is a better move than through the middle. And I know we don't have Solanke, and I don't know we don't have Richarlison. I also don't think Son is fantastic at attacking the ball in the air either. Maybe hindsight's 2020 here, but maybe you do something crazy and put Lancashire in, right? But I think today would have for sure called for a striker rather than a false nine, if we want to call Kulusevski that. And I think it cost us, honestly, that piece right there.
And I guess that's the problem when both of your out and out strikers are missing through injury, you kind of have to improvise, right, Caroline? But I mean, Kulusevski, I thought when the halftime sub was made and they brought Brennan Johnson in, took Pop Sarr out, and moved Kulusevski back into that kind of number 8/number 10 role like we saw against Everton a week ago. I mean, Spurs dominated for much of that second half.
Yeah, I agree. I think that when we've seen Kulusevski kind of working in tandem with Maddison in the midfield, that's been a lot more successful. And it is surprising to me a little bit because I kind of thought they might cancel each other out at times, but we haven't really seen that. They've actually worked well together. But I think the big issue is just, like Scott said, the lack of that target man kind of striker. We know that Sonny is not great with his head, but frankly, nobody else in the forward line is except for Solanke or Richarlison. Even though, Will Lancashire would have been a great option if he was fit, but he's also got a, slight injury right now. So it was just an unfortunate situation to be left without a single recognized striker for this game. But I feel like despite that, we still created a lot of chances. And I think that was really just down to, Odegaard bringing sort of a new dimension to the attack. It's not like we were one-dimensional by any means. It was just a matter of the finishing once again. So that's something that's frustrating. But at the same time, as everyone basically has been saying today, if we had a real striker in this game, I think we would have maybe not ran away with it, but it probably would have been a comfortable win.
I think the change at halftime for me, I thought, okay, what's he doing here? He's going right back to what he did against Everton, and that was a little bit confusing for me at first because I'm thinking Newcastle does not equal Everton, but at the same time, we saw the difference that it made. And if you look at kind of like the momentum charts or just like the game flow charts, Spurs are so incredibly dominant after halftime. They obviously, the one goal they get comes from an own goal, but it was still made by the pressure that Spurs were just constantly creating. I mean, if you look at basically all the underlying stats in this match, other than XG, which I want to come on to, especially with Scott, favor Spurs in this match. I mean, they had 66% of the possession to Newcastle's 34. They had 20 shots to Newcastle's 9. Equal amount of big chances, but shots on goal were 6-3. Corners, Spurs have been getting a ton of corners in these first 3 matches and actually looking threatening on them. Set pieces is another thing that we've really talked about a lot with this club. I think both offensively and defensively, Spurs have looked pretty good on set pieces in 3. Granted, it's a small sample size of only 3 matches, but They've looked pretty good thus far in those instances, and today got 12 corners to Newcastle's 7. So a lot of those like on the surface stats looked really good for Spurs. And then I come back to XG. They lost the XG battle in this match 1.57 to 1.26, and that's due to a lack of the finishing for me. I mean, the chance creation was there. There just wasn't crispness in the finishing, and I really don't know how that gets better right now until these players start to find form and you get players that, Sonny obviously scored twice last week from 2 different positions, but he was not getting into super threatening positions to be able to score today. We did see a few different really good opportunities from players like Basuma or Sarr coming up from the midfield and kind of having those balls laid off to them at the top of the box and having really good shots. But just overall, it just didn't seem like – it seemed like a lot of pressure, and that's what led to the own goal was the pressure. But there weren't a lot of clear-cut chances, which are going to lead to those, the high expected goal totals. Scott, is there any way that gets fixed other than just players getting into some amount of form? We're only 3 matches in, and it's been kind of a little bit of a different lineup with obviously the injuries that we've discussed.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to unpack here. Not with the way that you phrased or prefaced that at all, but just in general, there's a lot to unpack here. We do create a lot of chances. We don't take them. It happened all last year too, and I think it probably was a part of why we ended up fighting for 5th and not 4th was our inability to take our chances last year. So it's proving to be true again, like you just alluded to with XG, which as much shit as I give XG, it is super valuable in a lot of ways, and this is a great example of it, right? But our XG isn't as strong as the chances that we seem to create, right? As you just got to. Sometimes I question whether or not that is systemic. We talk about it a lot. Our most clear-cut chances are low crosses from the touchline. We're getting better at creating through the middle for sure, and especially with Kulusevski and Madison as dual 8-10s, as we were just talking about. That's a big piece of that, so that will improve. But I think as much as I agree with and want to talk about and focus on the fact that if we take our chances, we win today, I also don't love that we're going to have to score 3 or 4 goals a game to win. And that's just the way it is with this system. And that just scares me a little bit. I know we switch off, and Ange points to that today for sure with their second goal. And we did switch off. But even if we remove the do they switch off, do they not switch off from it all, at times we have 2 defenders back, and we all know that, and we get caught on counters, and it's a 4-on-2, and that's not switching off as much. Again, maybe a systemic issue. And I just don't bank on this team getting those 3 or 4 goals every game right now, and we'll see. There was a time in the past, and I don't even want. It was under Pochettino, and I'm hesitant to say that because I'm just always like a Poch homer and don't want to sound biased, right? But under Poch, we for number 1 in created chances, number 1 in goals scored, and number 1 in goals conceded. So it can be done, right? It doesn't have to be just like this absolute Wild West all the time. And now I sound like I'm getting into Ange Postecoglou and problems there, which I don't mean to, but just again, it's always going to make me nervous that we need to score 3 or 4 times a game in order to win, because I just don't think we have that in us right now. And yeah,
you brought up Ange. Let's hear briefly a little bit of what Ange had to say after the match, and then I want to. You brought up the points that we wanted to go to next, and we're going to come back and talk about that. But let's hear from Ange really quick.
Very similar, I guess, to our first sort of away game where. We controlled it for the most part, nullified most of the threats that, Newcastle have. I mean, it's obviously a difficult opponent here at home. The crowd created a pretty strong atmosphere for the home side, and little things go their way, but I thought for the most part we handled that really well. And then gained the ascendancy in the game, and, we just needed to kill it off, and we didn't. And disappointing second goal. I thought we switched off a little bit, but the game should have been well over by then. So another sore one, unfortunately, where we haven't got the rewards for our play. But ultimately it's 3 strong performances for the first 3 games that the results don't reflect in that way.
Caroline, I want to ask you about pragmatism, because that's the word that I think a lot of people have been bringing up when it comes to this way that this club has now been playing for more than a year under Ange Postecoglou, and they're obviously trying to implement it through a lot of new faces and just it's been a year now though, and I think fans are still wanting Ange to be something he's not almost, and that's kind of led to this, in my opinion, absurd calls for him to change and do something different. And I just don't. I think we know that he's not going to do anything different. But if that's the case, then people are just going to be frustrated and want him gone, which is the more shocking. And I think it seems erratic to even think that way. And I'm not even really phrasing a question to you, more to just say what's going on, because you told me, I watched the game a little bit. I did not watch it live, I watched it a little bit later. And when I came back into our group chat, you told me that people were calling for him to be fired. And I was kind of baffled by that, but also at the same time, not baffled, because it's Spurs Twitter. And I don't know. I'm rambling at this point. Save me. What's going on?
Yeah, I don't even need a question. I have lots of thoughts. Don't worry. But I think for me, we've seen such a drastic change in just the overall energy of the team under Ange. And that feels like kind of a woo-woo thing to say. But I think it makes a difference as a fan, as a spectator. Like, the games are just more enjoyable to watch. And so for that reason alone, I feel willing to give him patience to work things out on like the, sort of level of minutia. And if we're going to talk about the details, if my stats are correct, this was only Radu's 5th start as a Spurs player. So, we can talk about, we've been playing this high line for, months and months now, but he hasn't, So I think he might still need a little bit of time to get calibrated with that. And he's not a slow player by any means, but he's also not Mickey Van de Ven. No one is. So, I think I said this at times last season. I feel like Van de Ven is probably our most irreplaceable player in the lineup, because, there's a reason everybody calls him a cheat code. He is. So I think we were really missing him today. And that kind of goes into also the sort of XG imbalance. I wish I could remember who put this thought out there on Twitter, because I thought it was very astute, but they were pointing out that, Newcastle, a very good counterattacking team, had these very high quality chances because of the nature of the types of attacks they were executing, behind that high line. Whereas, Spurs, we were taking a lot of shots from outside the box, not the high quality chances that we would like to see. So I think you kind of have to take all that into context. And if there was going to be a game where Mickey was going to be missing, I would not have wanted it to be this one, because we know how, lethal they can be on the counterattack. But I don't think we need to be, for one, talking about Ange leaving at this juncture, because it would be insane. We're finally starting to get the squad to a better place where he can actually execute his system properly. Obviously, we've got some injuries right now that are complicating that. But I think that we're really going to be set up well, as this season progresses, but also going into the next couple of seasons. And fans don't want to hear that, obviously, because, we're not always patient people and we want to win now. But it's a game of fine margins. And I think we're going to start getting some of these results. It's just the start of the season has not gone the way we would have liked.
And I hate to be like, at least it didn't go as poorly as it did the last 2 times at St. James Park. But at the same time, I do feel a little bit that way. Like I felt like Spurs were somewhat hard done by the scoreline today. Like I feel like they at least deserved a point from this match. And it didn't really go their way. I also think it's worth noting, if we're going to talk a little bit more about these center backs and the Romero Dragishin combo today, it did surprise me a little bit, although when I thought about it a little more, it made sense that Dragishin played on the right and Romero on the left, because Dragishin has not looked good in the moments that he's played on the left. And I thought both of them, despite the 2 goals that were given up in kind of a I don't think either of the center backs were directly at fault for either of the goals. And I thought overall they played a fairly strong game. I think when you ask both Romero and Dragishin to play in a way that Van de Ven plays, to your point, Caroline, it is a little bit putting them at a disadvantage because neither of them are as quick or as, frankly, I think both of them can be composed in moments, but neither are as composed as Van de Ven. And your point about him being the most indispensable member of this squad, I think is spot on. I think that you have to change. I think you have to change the way that you approach things somewhat when you don't have Van de Ven in the lineup. But obviously that's not something that Ange is going to do. And I think that's where the pragmatism thing comes in, is if you don't have that one cheat code, are you able to continue to play such a high line? I mean, that second goal, that line was as high as it can get. It was on the halfway line, and it took one pass to slice through that defense, like a hot knife through butter.
Well, and Destiny kind of was left to recover. And frankly, I don't think he has looked quite right since coming back from, the injury that ended his previous season. He doesn't look to me like he's at full fitness. And that was just kind of unfortunate that it fell to him to be the one trying to make that recovery run, and he just couldn't do it. So, yeah, I agree. We probably should have been making some adjustments for that reason if we don't have the appropriate cover for the center backs.
Yeah, I'm going to be less flattering on Romero than maybe you were, Andrew. I don't think he had the greatest game that I've ever seen him play. Now, I don't come at him when I say that or even necessarily fault him. He was playing on the left side, but I do think he lost his spacing a few times and lost his man because of it a couple of times, especially on the second goal. Udogie as well. I agree with you, Caroline. I don't think Udogie's looked great. But where I'm a little bit frustrated with both Udogie and Romero is that neither of them seem to make the adjustment today required because we're sans Van de Ven. Udogie has to, first of all, understand that he doesn't have the freedom that Mickey Van de Ven affords him when Mickey Van de Ven's not there. He needs to be a little bit more pragmatic is the word of the day, right? And Romero has to understand that you don't have Mickey Van de Ven, and you need to also be a little bit more pragmatic with your positioning, right? I know you want to get forward, but Mickey Van de Ven allows you to do that, and that's why we were adamant that we bring him in. So I think both of them are somewhat at fault today, especially the second goal. I think they both switched off for sure. And I don't really fault Radu because, like Carolyn said, it's his fifth or sixth start. Part of me wonders if it would have made sense to just play him on the left rather than Romero, but I'm going to trust that Ange made the right decision based on what he had seen in training and all of that. But anyways, to wrap it all up, Udogie and Romero, I think, take some responsibility for sure today.
I hear that point, but I also think that's something, playing that high of a line and playing in that style is what they're being told to do. It's what they're being coached to do. So, if they're being, I guess my point is, if they're being put in a position to not be able to succeed, then that is a coaching failure, in my opinion. Which
I think
I can critique the coach for, but I'm not going to call for his job. Like,
yeah, exactly.
There's a big gap between these two things.
Yeah, just to go back to kind of what you were saying earlier, Andrew, it's baffling to me that there's sort of this narrative today that this was an identical failure to the previous two Newcastle away games, because it wasn't. Like, it really was an improvement in so many aspects. This, obviously the result is the same, but the scoreline looks so much better. It's not like we were demolished and demoralized, which I think is fair to say about the previous two encounters. So, yeah, I feel like you have to understand that we are on a journey with this new coach. It's a process. There will be games that don't go our way. But as long as the underlying trends are going in the right direction, I can still feel good about it. And I think for the most part, that was true today, all things considered, with injury absences and, less than ideal circumstances.
Well, and I'll critique Ange for the slight lack of pragmatism, which I know he doesn't really. I don't know that he has very many pragmatic bones in his body when it comes to not playing a high line. But at the same time, I was really pleased at the halftime sub that he made, and I think that being down 1-0, it is very brave to take off the midfielder that you thought was going to be necessary in this kind of match, because you're going to need to run, you're going to need to press, you're going to need, I mean, we talked about it, and Scott and Dakota did in our match preview. We talked about the fact that Sarr was probably going to be necessary in this match, and Ange recognized at halftime, no, we can go ahead and stick Decky in that 8/10 role with Madison and still get something. We can be a little bit more, I would call that a more forward-footed move to put Brennan out there. And Brennan came on and looked great. I mean, he really did change the match in the second half. And I was really critical of Brennan over the first two matches, especially in our group chat. And I think I even said last week on the pod that Brennan has not impressed me in the first two matches. I think Brennan's job should be coming off the bench and running at people and trying to get to the byline and hit cutbacks. He had at least 2 or 3 balls across the face of goal today that, if there's a true striker playing, and that's not a dig on Sonny because I think he has some striker elements, but nobody was able to get on the end of any of those balls that Brennan put across the face of goal. And look, I think that Nick Pope had a really good game as well. Like, that was a big part of it. Ange even credited him in the post match, talking about how good he was. But there were a few of those balls that went across his face that he would have had no chance on if there was a true striker in there to poke them in. And while, like I said, while I can critique Ange in some aspects, the man made a really good halftime substitution, and it changed the game and it got us back level, and they kept the pressure up. But then, you know, like you said, you switch off one moment and you can be down in the blink of an eye once again. And that's exactly what happened.
Yeah. I think where I'm maybe most frustrated with all of this, it is not with Ange Postecoglou at all. It's not even with any of the players necessarily. I'm just frustrated that here we are with another slow start to the season. And again, it's very early days, but I also make the slight argument that with the competition around us and the pace at which the game is growing and all of that, you really can't afford slow starts in this league anymore, right? And again, I don't expect us to win the league. I'm not saying that, but I'm just really sick and tired of us chasing our tails and working uphill as a club. And it's just year after year after year after year this happens. And I joked about it before the league on our opening pod. I said it's a great time to be a Spurs fan because by week 3 we're going to be like, well, fuck, we're probably not winning the league, but like, let's keep marching forward. And here we are, right? And I wouldn't credit that as some crazy prediction because it's always written in the stars with this club, and I think that's why I'm just a little bit irritated and frustrated. And I know we're in the early years of our project, and I believe in this project. I look at the signings we've made. The average age, the ceiling that they seem to have. Odeberry looks like he's going to be a real player, and he's got a lot of work to do to get prepared to be a real part of the system. But, you know, another example of the work that we're doing. But I think at the same time, and Paul O'Keefe talked about this a little bit on Twitter today, if you look at the pace of the game and you look at where the game is going, I'm not really sure that like a 3 to 5 year project really gets us ahead of anybody just because of that pace of the game. So like, I believe in the project for sure. I believe in the coach. I believe the Spurs are working really hard to go in a new direction that does get us there. But I look at City and I look at Liverpool and I look at Arsenal and I look at PSG and I look at Madrid and all these teams that can spend beyond our capabilities. And again, I just don't necessarily believe that a 3 to 5 year product gets us ahead of or even with some of those teams that I'm talking about. And I think that's where I'm just a little bit disheartened.
I mean, I think what you're talking about, though, it's just the nature of world football at this point, where there are clubs that are, you know,
100%
head and shoulders above.
It's like we talked about, the game's completely broken, and that's the issue behind almost everything that we can want to complain about as Spurs fans. That we don't fit into this broken system that is world football, right? As a club, and I'm happy for that, and I'm proud of being a part of a club that almost competes and isn't part of that broken system. But again, because of the game, it's disheartening. So I'll leave it at that.
Man, you really brought me down with that. I mean, I think there can be more to the joy of building a project and the joy of building something a little bit more organic than what we see elsewhere. And I think that's where I find my joy in watching Spurs and watching development and watching younger players and watching them mesh with veterans and that kind of thing. But results like today are evidence, I think, more of coaching style and club style than anything. And I think that's what I was trying to get at earlier, is that the word pragmatism has been something that we've talked about for over a year now since Ange came in. And I'm not saying that you have to, low block and counter against Newcastle when you go to St. James Park. Like, I don't want to see Spurs do that. I want to see them play the way they played today. And I think with a few different bounces of the ball, it's 2-1 the other way instead of 2-1 for the bad guys. And I think that I can take solace in knowing that they, like, to dare is to do is what we always say. And like, I think that when Spurs were playing under Mourinho and Conte and even Nuno briefly, like, there was not a lot of to dare is to do going on. And I think that the fact that we've got Ange in now, like, we've seen to dare is to do now for more than a year. And while results are not always going to be there, like they weren't today, and like they haven't been for these first 3 matches, it feels like, 4 points from a possible 9. It feels like 5 points dropped, frankly. But I can see the building blocks of something. And I think a lot of fans, and I'm not saying this is you, Scott, or you, Caroline, but a lot of fans choose not to see those building blocks, and they just want, it's like they want instant gratification from everything. It's kind of the world we live in. Like, everybody wants, like, you got to swipe right. You need the next thing. You need the next cookie in your mouth immediately before you're done chewing the previous one. So, like, you got to build to something, in my opinion, to earn it. And frankly, if these other clubs want to do it differently, I'm fine with that. That's not how Spurs are going to operate.
Well, and I think there's always this tension in the fan base between wanting to see that youth development that we're starting to see the club really commit to again, and wanting to see immediate results. So, we might have some of those stars of the future, but they need some time. They need the experience. They have to get these games at some point. And I think it is to Ange's credit that he's willing to throw them in as quickly as possible and get them that experience. Because, if you got a player like Odebear, who looks really promising, but, he's not the finished product. But it's kind of worked out with this injury situation right now that he's getting some valuable game time. And it's looking a little rocky right now, but it's probably going to pay some dividends later in the season. So I think I'm just trying to readjust my expectations about the season. Not that I ever felt like we were going to be title contenders. We joked about it, but it was joking. But I think now it's looking at, maybe we do put full focus on the cup runs and, let the league work itself out the way it does.
I'm glad you bring up expectations, because I think I will use that word to also point out that I do understand why some fans are incredibly frustrated. And I'm not talking about like the nonsense on Twitter, right? But there's good, long-standing Spurs fans that have been fans of the club a lot longer than I have, that are just disappointed. And I think the biggest reason is we are right on the cusp of doing the biggest thing you can do in world football, but we can't do it, and we can't get ourselves there. And I think that's one of, like, actually the darkest places to be in the pyramid. And I know that sounds crazy, but if you're battling a relegation every year like Everton and like James, who came on the pod, like, I think he's, he can swallow a result like today, right? Because the expectation is that, you may stay up, you may not, right? And then if you're from a team who finishes in the middle of the championship or the middle of League One consistently, you just kind of get used to being there, right? And it's easier to stomach tough results. But when you're right there and you can see like the golden cake, but you just can't quite reach it, it just kind of sucks, probably more than many other fans experience, as like snobby and privileged as that sounds. Anyway, so I understand why people are pretty disappointed. I'm definitely not throwing my name into the mix of Ange out and Spurs got to fix their shit and all blah blah blah. I'm just saying that logically, I see why there's so much disappointment. It makes sense.
And can I just add too that I think a big part of the frustration is knowing how many years the club set itself back with those hirings of Mourinho and Nuno and Conte. And, you know, it's not fun having to go back and basically fix all those mistakes. And that's basically the job that Ange has been landed with. But at the same time, you know that it's not going to help to just reset to zero again and let Ange go and start over. So we're in a situation where you kind of have to commit at this point.
Well, not only with those hires of managers, but how about not spending any money
The
on a player
transfers,
for an
yeah.
entire window? And that's kind of what I want to shift to now. I want to like, unless you guys had anything else to say about the game, I think we've kind of beat that horse. But like the transfer window comes to a close on Friday. And listen, we're going to touch on transfers today. We're going to do a lot more on transfers next week because there's an international break and we need something to talk about on the pod next week, if I'm being completely honest. Not that Spurs will not, I'm sure, give us plenty to talk about this week because they always tend to. But like Giovanni Lo Celso is part of this conversation. Like he goes out and he's that last bit of that window that had Lo Celso and Ndombele and Ryan Sessegnon. And now all three of those players have moved on. It's a window where Spurs spent a boatload of money and have nothing to show for it. And this is kind of the whole conversation we're having. They set themselves back by a club like Spurs cannot have a window like that and have it turn out well for them. Now, maybe now that the stadium has been around for a few years, the gate receipts are coming in, Spurs are making money hand over fist at this point. Maybe going forward, Spurs can handle a window like that a little bit better. But looking at it from the right here, right now, that makes it really, really difficult. So, you know, we get Giovanni Lo Celso out. Manor Solomon has gone on his loan deal to Leeds. There's a few other moves that got made, some lesser moves. Josh Keeley, George Abbott both went on loan. Actually, Josh Keeley signed a new deal, went on loan. No home for Sergio Reguilon, which is going to be awkward coming down the street. I don't know what's going to go. There are still a few different international windows. I think Turkey, the window in Turkey is still open for like another 10 days or something. So there are still possibilities for movement outgoing for some of these players, but Spurs got a good deal of business done, I think, in this window. And I know that some people will talk about the fact that there was no left-sided defensive help, which might have come into play today with what we already discussed with Van de Ven's injury. But you know, Ange talked about this in his Friday pre-match press conference. And he said, you know, we're not gonna sign a player just to sign a player. It's got to be the right player. And I think that goes back to what I was talking about earlier, with this being a project and this being something you build, and you don't just this club is not Chelsea. They don't just throw money at problems and hope that they go away. They're not going to sign a squad and bloat it up to 40 plus players. Like that's just not what they're going to do. They're trying to trim it down. They're still trying to clear it out. This is a third window for Ange in the books. And I think with all the turnover that we've seen, you know, and all the outgoings versus the incomings, it's notable. It's a notable moment for this club with this window now being closed. Did you guys have any like kind of short button hook to put on the window? Like I said, we're going to talk about it a little more in depth next week, but there were no real moves that were made late in the window, and I don't think we expected any. We've kind of talked about a lot of the incomings, but just those couple of outgoings. Did either of you guys have anything to you know, summarize the window briefly before we talk about it kind of more in depth next week?
I don't have much on the window itself, but I do just want to touch quickly on the Lo Celso deal. I'm really excited about what we did here with Cardoso, and I'll remove the American bias here. He came in the Brazilian, I can't remember the name of the Brazilian league, but the Brazilian top division, and lit it on fire, played super well, and earned the move to Spain, and in Spain he was arguably their best player last year at Betis, right?
Yeah.
He was arguably their best player last year and continues to impress. And my understanding is, first of all, there's a 50% sell-on clause for Lo Celso. I don't have high hopes for the dude. I think he'll be fine in Spain, but I'm not counting my chickens with that sell-on clause. But with Cardoso, again, my understanding is that we get him for a $33 million price tag guaranteed. If we drop 33 on the table, he's our player. And in the current game, I think he's probably worth more than that. Also, we have the 20% sell-on clause if they decide to sell Cardoso somewhere because we don't want him. So it was a well-worked deal, not only because of the numbers and the finances and all of that, but Lo Celso needed to go. Like he had to go. And I think we found a very creative way to get that done. But if we've identified Cardoso as somebody that we value, I think we should put a lot of stock in that as fans. We've seen what Johan Lange has done since he came in. Odegaard out of nowhere, and he looks to be a wonderful fit for this system. Solanke as well, which wasn't out of nowhere, but I think bringing him in instead of an Ivan Toney shows that we're really working towards specific profiles that we know are the correct profile. And if we think that's Cardoso, I'm just kind of surprised by how many people are so against this deal, right? I think it was not only a shrewd play from Levy, but I think Cardoso is going to continue to impress. And if he ends up with Spurs, I think that's a very good thing.
And it's kind of a win-win situation, because if we decide to pass on him because we found a better target, it's not like we've brought in this player that we're going to struggle to move on like Lo Celso. So like you said, I think very shrewd, and we can't afford to sort of absorb those losses like we just were talking about. And I think, to your original question too, Andrew, tying up the transfer window as a whole, we had a lot of moves that are not going to provide instant gratification, but I think they're going to be smart in the long term. So I'm okay with it.
Yeah, I mean, we've already seen the Lucas Bergvalls, the Archie Grays, the Odebears. I mean, we're already seeing some of this on the pitch. It's only going to get, more seasoned and developed. And honestly, the idea of trying to judge a transfer window days after it is closed, I mean, we would have judged that 2019. Was it 2019 that we signed Lo Celso and Ndombele and Sessegnon? Was that the year? 5 years later,
thought it was brilliant.
Everyone thought it was a brilliant window. 5 years later, what did I say? It was the most meaningless 3 purchases. I mean, I don't mean to say meaningless, but I think you guys know what I'm saying. Like that, we saw nothing from those things. So, yeah, that's kind of the way it goes. We did get a couple of draws this week as well, and I don't mean ties, but Spurs will travel to Coventry City for the first Carabao Cup test, third round that they enter in, being in Europe. That match is going to be, I believe, 2 days after the North London Derby, which is Spurs' next match, 2 weeks from today. I believe that match is on Tuesday, September 17th. It'll at least be that week. So that'll be the first midweek challenge for Spurs, is a trip to Coventry City. This, I think, is a kind of tough test. Coventry are a good championship side. I don't know that you're going to be able to fully rotate like a full new 11, but so you're probably gonna have to have some bodies on tap to be able to play in quick succession in that week. But this will be a good one for a good test for Spurs in this first month. Caroline, you mentioned earlier like wanting to put in a cup run. I've become a Carabao Cup truther in some senses, in that I don't really think it means that much. It's a £100,000 prize to win it. It is not like it's not really worth it to the big clubs, and the way that they're treating it, especially this year, with not allowing, teams that were in Europe could not draw one another in this round because of conflicts with the European schedule. They're really making it so that the bigger Premier League teams will only meet in the quarterfinals, semifinals, and final of this competition. And I just think I think this cup is being watered down, is kind of what I'm trying to say. And I think that's in some ways unfortunate, but also in some ways could be a good thing, because I think this particular competition needs a revamp of some kind. It needs a facelift. It needs an image overhaul. And that's not to say I don't want Spurs to try to win it. It was their last trophy 16 years ago. Can I do math? Like it's been a long time, and this is the last major piece of hardware that Spurs won. But I don't see them going after it this year. I think they're going to put in a good effort against Coventry City, and if they win that, they'll see what comes next. But I definitely think that the Europa League is going to be the one that they go after a little bit more. But what do you guys have any thoughts on that? Just the League Cup as a whole needing kind of a facelift?
Yeah, I do agree that it needs a reputation boost, and I think it's the same way on the women's side. People talk about that all the time, that it's, you know, it's almost too easy for the eventual winners to get to the final and to win it because of the way the competition is structured. And now we're starting to see that on the men's side as well, with the favorable draws for the teams that are in Europe. It's being engineered to be easier for those teams to begin with. But if I were going to play devil's advocate, I would just say that, you know, because of the easier route that we can take to get to the final, and because it's kind of the first cup final you can get to in the season, it could be a useful boost to the team's morale if we were able to win it. So, you know, I don't think it's something we should not put effort into by any means, but I do agree with you that the Europa League, like the prestige of that would be so much more impactful. So you've got to like balance it a little bit.
I'll quickly agree with both of you. I think we should go and try to win the League Cup. We need a trophy. We're not in a position to be turning our nose up at trophies, and I'm not saying you are, Andrew, at all when I say that. But at the same time, I do think it's watered down. I think it's become a glorified community shield. If I look at the Bundesliga and Serie A and La Liga, it's the Copa del Rey, it's the Coppa Italia, and it's the Pokal, and they don't have this like other fun competition necessarily that people pay attention to, right? So that's why I say it's like a glorified community shield. Those other leagues tend to have their community shield as a 4-team playoff, right? Where England doesn't. So it's certainly designed to get the bigger clubs into the final. But at the same time, we need to go and try to win a trophy. So if it's a League Cup, then let's go and let's build from there.
All this stuff eventually comes down to money, and if the prize money is not worth it in the end, it's not going to be something that clubs really like push the pedal down to go win. Now, the Europa League, however, I think is a different story, and especially with the new format this year and two extra matches to this quote unquote group stage or league stage, I guess they're now calling it, because it's not a group, it's one big group. If you don't know the new format for both the Champions League and Europa League, and I guess the Conference League is doing the same thing, go look it up, because it is a change and you will need to be aware of that change. Spurs have been handed their 8 matches for this league setup, this stage. I'm not going to try to pronounce every team's name, because I can't. I haven't even done that homework, but I know they play Roma. I can pronounce that one. I know they play Rangers. I can pronounce that one. I can pronounce Hoffenheim. The matches are what they are, and Spurs are going to have to navigate them. I did not realize, and I guess this makes sense, but like they start later this month. Later, it is September 1st as we record this. The first match is September 26th. They run all the way through January 30th. So this is there's a lot of football coming in the next few months for Ange Postecoglou and his team. Like they are going to be playing not only, you know, if they can beat Coventry City on the, you know, the week of the 17th, like they'll get another League Cup match, they'll have the Premier League schedule, and they'll have all these Europa League matches to try to navigate. You know, trip to Germany, they'll make a trip to Turkey. They have to go to Hungary. Like there's some fun trips in here. There will be some reunions as well. Obviously, Galatasaray has some former Spurs players still. I'm sure Ange will enjoy going to play at Rangers. He'll, I'm sure, get a warm welcome, having been a former Celtic man. That will be great for him. But the matches kind of are what they are. I was never really that worried about the Europa League draw, just because these extra matches are going to be what they are, and the depth is going to be tested. I think that's that's the only part for me that when we talk about the transfer window and talk about the fact that there isn't extra left-sided defensive cover, that's why I'm actually okay with Ange holding out Van de Ven for this match and holding out players like Solanke and even Richarlison. Like you need that depth. And I know it didn't work out in that they didn't get the 3 points that they wanted or even a point against Newcastle, but you almost got to save your bullets at some point for the entirety of what is going to be a really, really long, probably close to 60 game season in the long run. So all that's a preamble to say, what are your guys' thoughts on the Europa League? Anything stand out to you? Is there a favorite match that you're looking forward to? I can't imagine we know much about any of these teams and what they're going to look like down the road. But Scott, where are you at with this?
Dude, 60 times we're going to have to watch Spurs. God, it's going to be a slog. It is going to be a slog. My key takeaway from the Europa League, other than my deep desire to win the thing and my pleading for the club to prioritize that above all else this season, is that I'm really glad we opened against Roma, because I think Roma is probably the other favorite in this competition rather than Spurs. They've looked really good under De Rossi. And so I'm glad that we open against them, because I don't want us to take this competition lightly. So from the get-go, in my opinion, again, you're playing against the other favorite, and it's critical that we go and beat Roma at home match week 1. So I'm really looking forward to that game.
Well, I got bad news for you. We don't open against Roma. We don't play them until November. So
what? I could have sworn they were the first game.
Not according to what I see, but maybe I have it wrong. I have them as the 5th game.
I assume that the order the club released the list was in order of the matches, but maybe that's not correct. Maybe they were the first team we drew, and then the fixtures were put together after the order in which we drew teams was put out. Now, knowing that, I'll back up and
that
say
is the case. The fixtures were released on Saturday, so you're right about that. That's how it was.
Gotcha.
Done.
Well, and at the same time, not to just back up and say, oh, still a decent point here, but at the same time, I do think it's also favorable to play them towards the end of the run-up games we have to play and prepare yourself for what maybe comes after that. So either way, I'm just glad we're playing against Roma, right? I think that'll be an exciting match. There's going to be some teams in there too that we're going to have to watch out for. We can't take any of them lightly. We've even been beat by Karabakh in recent memory. So yeah, lot of work to do, but as one of the two favorites.
And that's the first match.
It is.
Yeah, that's the first match is Karabakh, the 26th. That is a home match. I think that there's no one. The Europa League is it's not the Champions League, but I think it's just as tricky in that there are a lot of these teams. You get some teams in the Champions League that there's a couple of those lesser teams in the Champions League that you should be able to just handle. I don't think there's any team like that in the Europa League. They're all very plucky, if you ask me. And I think that despite the fact that there's casual fans will not have heard of Elfsborg from Sweden, but you're gonna have to go beat that team, and you're gonna have to put your best foot forward and to do it. So I don't know. It's just one of those things. So the good thing about this year with the Europa League is that you don't get Champions League teams dropping down from it's just your league is your league. So you're not going to get a bunch of shifting and everything. It'll be the top 8 in this, I guess now 32 team format that automatically advance. And then the next 8 or next 16 will advance to a playoff. So you got to at least be top 24 after the 8 games to move on. But you really want to be in that top 8 to automatically go into the knockout rounds and kind of await your opponent from there. So we'll see. It's a lot of football though. Like I said, there's a lot going on in terms of that fixture list. When you go look at the full list of fixtures, and you've got the League Cup in there now and all the Europa League games, it's like Spurs are going to be playing twice a week for basically the next 3 months, which is a lot of football. There's a lot of games to be played. So it should be fun, but it's like Scott said, we got to watch this team play this many times. It's going to be a lot to take in. I do want to move us on to because we've already been going at this now for close to an hour, and the Spurs women's news. It's there's so much of it. There's just so much going on. Let's start with Spurs signing the 29-year-old Australian forward Hayley Raso on a free transfer from Real Madrid. This was a surprise move, but also it pairs nicely with the other moves, the outgoing moves that we need to talk about, because they seem to be somewhat in unison, somewhat in sync here. But Hayley Raso is a player that has been around for a long time. She's 29, but she's been playing like at a high level, all around the world for her entire career. Caroline, what do we know about her game and what she brings? I know she's got experience in both the WSL, the NWSL. She's got experience in the A-League, in her native Australia. What does she bring to this front line that Spurs have been lacking over the last handful of seasons?
Well, I won't say we've been lacking it, but I think she will add to our pressing ability in the forward line. I think that's probably what I think of her most for. Especially when she's playing with Australia. She's really been a standout for them. And, when she left Man City a while back, I was actually hoping we would have signed her then. So this came as a very welcome surprise. A little later down the line, she finally is signing with Spurs. And, all the past few weeks, we've kind of been talking about our Spurs women being ambitious this summer. And I think so far, this is really the most ambitious move that we've made. A player who's internationally recognized, just high-class player, and also I think going to be a good culture fit as well, which we know is really important to Robert Villaham's manager style. He really stresses, having that team cohesion. So I think she's going to be a great addition. And, like you said, we should have seen this coming with who is leaving.
Yeah. We woke up to the news today that Rosella Ayan has joined Chicago Red Stars on loan until the end of December, which is when you reminded me earlier that the NWSL season ends. So it's a short-term loan, but she'll come back, I guess, in January to Spurs, unless there's another perhaps move that we don't know about that's been lined up for her after that. And then also the even more shocking news, I think, that Celine Bizet is going to Manchester United after that club triggered a release clause in her contract that is worth £60,000, which seems like nothing. This was all reported today by the BBC, and that sounds like a move. That second one that we're discussing here sounds like something that Spurs kind of let get away from them, if you ask me. It sounds like they did not really take care of their books in this instance, and it almost sounds like Grace Clinton did some recruiting or something. Something shady be going on here, right?
Yeah, Grace is dead to me now, so let's just get that out of the way first. But seriously, I think you're right that the club did drop the ball in this situation with Celine, and it's not official yet, so there's still a chance the deal could not go through. But it's not great that we got to this situation where she's going for far less than she's actually worth at this point in her career, I believe. And they've really done a good job of locking down other key young players on contracts, new contracts. Like Jess Snaz is obviously the best example of that in recent history. So I'm surprised that they let it get to this point where she was able to go. And God, I wish it was anyone but United. That really rankles me. But yeah, with Roz, no one's going to pretend that she was ever the most consistent player, but she also gave us some really fun moments in her Spurs career. So, it looks like she's going to be coming back technically from loan. I don't think she's probably going to get back into the side, although, we're going to be a little less well equipped at the right wing position if Celine does leave. But I think she's going to do well in NWSL, honestly. I think that could be a good league for her. And Chicago has made some really interesting changes lately. And obviously they have Lauren Donaldson, who just came in as coach not too long ago. So I think that'll be a nice move for her. So I'm happy for her.
Yeah, that's certainly not the move that I'm as concerned with as I am the Bizet move. I mean, especially just when you look at the age profiles of the two players. Roz is pushing 30. She's getting, I think she's 28 or 29 now, but Bizet is like still a 22-year-old, like on the rise player. And that's, if Spurs did let this one get away, it just in terms of not locking down a player and allowing a pretty minimal release clause to be triggered, that's pretty bad. Like that's just an oversight that you can't really not criticize, right, Scott? That's just basic mismanagement.
Yeah, it's frustrating because we saw such a positive foundation built last year, and was that we would all assume it was going to be a continued part of that foundation. She was a key player in a lot of regards last year for us, and again, you talk about her age, so it's really disappointing, and it does feel like we fumbled it this early in a project. Letting someone walk away who again is, I think, going to be a key part of that project is just really frustrating. I don't know how you replace her, and even if you do, take some time for that replacement to actually become what she was providing, in my opinion. So yeah, just frustrating. And I'm happy for Roz. I think everything Caroline said, I think it's a good move for her. Seems like we didn't see her playing a ton this year, right? If we were willing to let her go on loan, so a win-win for all parties, I think. But it surprised me.
Yeah, it's one of those things. Like we've been talking about the transfer window and wanting more moves, and now that we're getting them, we're almost like, okay, well, what's going on here? We're not really sure, but there are still 3 weeks left before the first match. I'm trying to remember when the window closes for the women on the women's side. Do you have that, Caroline? Isn't it? It's still, there's still a little bit of time left for moves to get done. It did not close on Friday like the men's window because the season starts so much later.
Yeah, so that ends September 13th, which is a Friday, and the season doesn't start until the weekend of the 21st, 22nd. So it actually ends before the season starts.
Yeah. And Spurs women play their first match on the 22nd at home to Crystal Palace. So we look forward to that. That is 3 weeks from the date of this recording, which we're doing on the 1st of September. So 3 weeks to go for the first match. Little more than 2 weeks still for the window. Sorry, a little more than a week, almost a full 2 weeks for the window. So still time to get stuff done and still time to add to the squad, but it is starting to get down to it. Speaking of home matches for Spurs women, they did finally announce their Tottenham Hotspur Stadium matches for the season. They will play the North London Derby on November 17th against Arsenal. Manchester United match will be in the big stadium as well. That is February 2nd. And then the Chelsea match will also be at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium on May 4th. Caroline, any thoughts on those 3 matches being the stadium matches? I mean, I think it makes sense for those 3 to be the matches, but more or less, any thoughts?
Well, just in light of what we just talked about, I'm thinking that February 2nd, I might need to be in a cave somewhere without internet access.
Have some good drugs for that day.
That's going to be a rough game. But I do think we've been asking for, obviously, just games in the main stadium period. So I'm glad there are some. And in the past, we've usually tended to play games against teams that were like sure wins. Obviously, the North London Derby last season was kind of the exception to that, and we got our first ever win against them. So I think it can be really good, motivation for the squad because they really, are vocal about wanting to show up for the home fans when they're at the main stadium. So that's good. And Chelsea, honestly, when we play Chelsea, those tend to be like our most entertaining games of the season. So for that to be, I don't think it's the last game, but one of the last games is going to be really fun.
It is the last home game, but the second to last match of the season on the schedule. So yeah, that'll be late in the season. But I know how hard it is for them to manage scheduling around other events and obviously the men's fixture schedule. But I think it's good that they at least got 3 on the schedule, and maybe they'll be able to add 1 or 2 others as the season goes along and as fixtures kind of dictate. So we'll have to see if they're able to fit that in, but at least they have announced it prior to the season starting and not in years past, they've kind of done it like, oh, in another 5 weeks, we're going to have a game at the stadium. And then they kind of do a shit job of promoting it. So at least I think they're even selling ticket packages for just those 3 matches, which is a good thing as well.
Right. Yeah. I love that they're doing that bundle so that, you're capturing the audience. That's really what we've been asking the club to focus on in terms of actually retaining some of the new fans who come in to see the women's team for these games, like get them to come back. So yeah, I think that's a positive.
And I also get that some fans will only want to go to those 3 games, and that's totally fine. I mean, we would like to see them go to Brisbane Road as well and see some other games, but like there will be some fans that will buy that ticket package, go to those 3 matches and have a great time. And like, hopefully Spurs can put on a show for them in those matches.
Brisbane Road is a whole other topic that we do not have time to get into today.
Not today, we don't, but we certainly will in the future. I think that's going to do it for this week's edition of the Tottenham Depot. Be sure to check out our episodes on our YouTube page, youtube.com/Tottenham Depot. Leave us a rating and review on your podcast app of choice. Really does help spread the word about the show. Be sure to follow us on Twitter, Instagram, Blue Sky, Threads, wherever you get your podcasts at Tottenham Depot. You can also reach out to us via email. That is at the link in our bio. Scott can be found at Scott G. Bird. Caroline is at CG Stefko. I can be found at A. Stetka. And again, follow us at Tottenham Depot. We'll be back next week. International break. We'll talk a little bit more in depth on the transfer window and kind of look ahead to what's next for Spurs after this defeat and heading into, yes, a North London derby, which everybody take a big, big, deep breath and enjoy international football after 3 weeks of the real thing, because that's always fun. It's always fun to take a break after 3 games of a 38 match season. That's just not what you want, but that's how we do it. Until next week, this has been the Tottenham Depot podcast. As always, come on, you Spurs.